The HOA president is standing at my front gate right now. All because my 6-month pregnant wife wouldn't show her ID when she was resting under a tree near the lake with stomach pain. She's not just recording video, but lives streaming, pointing at my wife's belly while screaming that this stranger is faking pain to spy on our residential community. She thinks this will be her viral moment, catching an illegal spy red-handed in broad daylight. But my wife is completely calm because she knows something this woman doesn't. When she sees my wife's documents, that confident smile will disappear instantly. This woman has no idea what she just walked into. Let me tell you how this insane story got completely flipped upside down. Have you ever lived near a crazy neighbor like this? Leave a comment. I'm Marcus Chun, a 29-year-old Vietnamese-American software engineer who just moved back to Penirage Estates with my wife Isabel to be closer to family. Why? I'm going to tell you about the most insane 2 hours of my life when a self-appointed neighborhood Karen decided to teach my wife a lesson, but ended up discovering she had messed with the completely wrong person. It was a peaceful Tuesday afternoon and I was working from home on a challenging project deadline. My wife Isabel, 6 months pregnant, had been having a rough time with anxiety and stress. So, her doctor recommended gentle exercise and fresh air. I still remember the first time we heard our baby's heartbeat 3 months ago, how my hands shook as I held Isabel's hand, thinking about how fragile and precious life could be. That memory haunted me constantly because I lived in fear of something going wrong, of losing the most important things in my world. So, when Isabel said she needed fresh air and wanted to walk around our new neighborhood, I encouraged her to go. Penirage Estates seemed like the perfect place to start our family when we moved here 2 weeks ago. Beautiful lawns, a gorgeous community lake, tree-lined streets where kids rode bikes and neighbors waved to each other. What we didn't know was that this picture-perfect neighborhood had been terrorized for 2 years by one particular resident who had appointed herself the unofficial neighborhood watchdog. Veronica Blackwood, a 48-year-old woman with too much time and an inflated sense of authority, had already successfully sued 3 families into moving away from Penirage. She had built a reputation for using legal intimidation and harassment to get her way, and most residents had learned to simply avoid her rather than deal with the inevitable drama she brought. Isabel was about 6 blocks from our house, walking slowly around the community lake when the pregnancy discomfort hit her like a freight train. Sharp pains in her lower back and abdomen forced her to sit down on one of the decorative stone benches along the walking path. She was just trying to catch her breath when she noticed a woman in a navy blazer marching toward her with a clipboard clutched like a weapon and a smartphone already recording. And this was Veronica Blackwood in her natural habitat, hunting for violations and ready to pounce on anyone who looked out of place in what she considered her neighborhood. Excuse me, quat, Veronica announced loudly as she approached, her voice carrying that particular blend of fake authority and genuine hostility that every Karen has perfected. This is private community property and I don't recognize you as a resident. Are you authorized to be here? Her phone was already positioned to capture Isabel's face. And I later discovered that Veronica had started live streaming on Facebook before she even approached my wife. She had titled her stream Catching Asian Infiltrators, which revealed the racist undertones that would become obvious as this nightmare unfolded. Isabel, still dealing with pregnancy discomfort and trying to process why a stranger was aggressively filming her, calmly explained that she lived in the neighborhood and was taking a doctor-recommended walk. She even pointed toward our house, but Veronica wasn't interested in reasonable explanations. Instead, she moved closer with her phone, speaking directly to her live stream audience in a voice dripping with theatrical concern. Patriots of Penirage. As you can see, they're trying to scout our premium American neighborhood. Notice how she's claiming medical issues, but can't provide any proof of residency. The racial undertones weren't subtle. Veronica made several comments about people like you and foreign infiltration that made it clear this wasn't just about property rights or community safety. She had targeted my wife specifically because we were Asian American, and in her twisted worldview, that automatically made us suspicious and unwelcome. What made it worse was that Veronica was performing for her online audience, turning what should have been a simple misunderstanding into racist theater designed to get views and validation from like-minded people. As Veronica continued her live stream performance, demanding that Isabel prove she belonged in their neighborhood, I was completely unaware that my pregnant wife was being harassed just blocks away. I was deep in code debugging a stubborn software issue with my headphones on and completely focused on work. If I had known what was happening, if I had seen the way this woman was treating my pregnant wife, pointing a camera at her like she was some kind of criminal, I would have lost my mind with rage. But Isabel, even while dealing with pregnancy discomfort and the stress of being confronted by an aggressive stranger, kept her composure in a way that should have been Veronica's first clue that she was dealing with someone who knew how to handle confrontational situations. My wife didn't get flustered or defensive. She didn't start arguing or try to prove herself to this self-appointed authority figure. Instead, she remained calm and observant, which only seemed to frustrate Veronica more and make her push harder for a reaction. When Veronica started making comments about how they communicate in their language and suggesting that Isabel's pregnancy might be fake or exaggerated, she crossed a line that would come back to haunt her in ways she couldn't imagine. But at that moment, riding high on the adrenaline of her live stream performance and the validation from her online audience, Veronica felt invincible. She believed she was exposing dangerous infiltrators and protecting her community from people who didn't belong. What Veronica didn't know was that my wife had been quietly observing and mentally cataloging every detail of this encounter. Isabel wasn't just some random pregnant woman who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. She was someone who had been trained to handle exactly these kinds of situations. Someone who understood the importance of staying calm under pressure and gathering evidence. As the confrontation escalated and Veronica's demands became more aggressive, the pain in Isabel's abdomen intensified from the stress. But when Veronica mentioned "Quat, people like you don't belong here, Quat," while pointing her camera directly at my wife's face, Isabel knew this wasn't just about property rights. This was about something much deeper and more dangerous. And she realized that this woman's behavior was part of a pattern that needed to be stopped. What happened next still makes my blood boil when I think about it. Veronica's live stream was gaining traction, and the racist comments from her viewers were getting bolder and more disgusting by the minute. She was reading some of them out loud, clearly emboldened by the support she was receiving from her online echo chamber. And Quat, that's right, Patriot Mom 47. They do send scouts before the main invasion, Quat, she said, nodding sagely at her phone screen. And yes, Truth Seek 88 Reels pregnancy is their newest cover story for illegal activities. The whole situation escalated when Veronica started talking about the Nguyen family, who had lived 3 houses down from us until about 8 months ago. We had another family just like this one. She told her audience, gesturing dramatically at Isabel, foreign infiltrators who claimed they belonged here, but I could tell they were up to something suspicious. I had to take legal action to protect our community values, and eventually they realized they weren't welcome and moved away voluntarily. The way she said voluntarily made it clear that the Nguyen family had been harassed and intimidated until they felt they had no choice but to leave their home. This revelation hit me like a punch to the gut when Isabel told me about it later. The Nans had been forced out of their neighborhood by this woman's systematic harassment campaign, and now she was trying to do the same thing to us. It wasn't just random paranoia or misguided community protection. It was a deliberate pattern of targeting Asian families and making their lives miserable until they gave up and left. Veronica had weaponized fake authority and social media to create a hostile environment for anyone who didn't fit her narrow definition of who belonged in her neighborhood. But Veronica wasn't satisfied with just making racist commentary for her live stream audience. She needed more drama, more content, more proof that she was the hero of this story. And Quat, I don't care if you claim to live here, Quat, she declared. And Quat, moving closer to where Isabel was sitting and trying to catch her breath. Anyone can make that claim. I need to see official documentation right now, or I'm calling the real authorities to have you removed from private property. Pointing Quat. The way she emphasized real authorities made it clear she saw herself as some kind of unofficial law enforcement officer with the power to detain and interrogate anyone she deemed suspicious. The stress of the confrontation combined with the physical discomfort she was already experiencing was taking a toll on Isabel. I could see in her posture and facial expression that the pregnancy-related pain was getting worse, probably triggered by the adrenaline and anxiety of being aggressively confronted by a hostile stranger. But Veronica interpreted Isabel's obvious discomfort as weakness, as proof that her intimidation tactics were working, and that she was close to exposing whatever imaginary conspiracy she believed she had uncovered. That's when things took a turn that would change everything. Veronica's phone rang, and when she answered it, I realized she had called the police before approaching Isabel. And Quat, yes, officer, I'm still here with the suspicious individual, she said loudly, clearly wanting both Isabel and her live stream audience to hear. Asian female claiming pregnancy, but I suspect it's fake. Definitely casing properties for potential break-ins. Yes, I'll stay on scene until you arrive. She hung up with a triumphant smile and turned back to her phone camera. Patriot's backup is on the way. Soon, we'll get to the bottom of this infiltration attempt. Within 10 minutes, a police cruiser pulled up near the lake area and outstepped Officer Thompson, a young rookie who looked like he was maybe 25 years old and inexperienced with these kinds of community disputes. Veronica immediately rushed over to him, speaking in urgent, hushed tones and occasionally pointing back at Isabel, who was still sitting on the bench trying to manage her discomfort. I watched from my home office window as this surreal scene unfolded. Having no idea that my pregnant wife was at the center of what was rapidly becoming a racially charged incident with law enforcement involvement, Officer Thompson approached Isabel with his hand resting casually on his belt, clearly having been influenced by whatever story Veronica had told him about dangerous infiltrators and suspicious activity. "Mom, I'm going to need to see some identification and proof that you're authorized to be in this private community in Quat," he said in that overly official tone that young cops use when they're trying to sound more experienced than they are. The fact that he was automatically taking Veronica's side without even asking for Isabel's version of events should have been a red flag, but rookie cops often make the mistake of trusting the person who called them without gathering all the facts first. Veronica was practically bouncing with excitement, continuing to live stream the entire encounter and providing running commentary for her audience. "And Quat, see how they stick together. Quat," she whispered to her phone, apparently thinking that Isabel and Officer Thompson were somehow conspiring together because they were both remaining calm and professional. And Quat, this is exactly the kind of coordinated behavior that proves my point about organized infiltration. Real Americans would be more cooperative and transparent pi en Quat. The irony was that Officer Thompson was trying to de-escalate the situation and get to the bottom of what was a misunderstanding, but Veronica kept interrupting and trying to direct his investigation based on her own paranoid theories. She had convinced herself that she was helping law enforcement uncover a serious threat to community safety when in reality she was wasting police resources and racially profiling innocent residents based on nothing more than xenophobic assumptions and social media-fueled paranoia. What none of us realized at that moment was that this confrontation was being recorded from multiple angles. Veronica's live stream was capturing her racist commentary and aggressive behavior. Officer Thompson's body camera was recording the entire interaction from an official law enforcement perspective. And Mrs. Patterson, an elderly neighbor who had been watching from her kitchen window, had started recording on her phone when she realized that something serious was happening. The evidence was piling up from every possible angle, creating a comprehensive record of exactly how this situation had escalated. From a simple misunderstanding to a racially charged incident involving false police reports and harassment. But when Officer Thompson looked at Isabel sitting there, clearly pregnant and obviously in some discomfort, and then looked at Veronica with her phone and clipboard, standing over her like some kind of self-appointed interrogator, his rookie instinct started to kick in. Something about this whole situation wasn't adding up the way Veronica had described it, and he was beginning to realize that he might have been called to the scene under pretenses. That's when I realized something was seriously wrong. I had taken a quick break from my coding project to grab some water when I glanced out the window and saw a police car parked near the community lake. My heart immediately started racing because I knew Isabel was somewhere in that area, and the sight of law enforcement in our peaceful neighborhood set off every protective instinct I had. I quickly threw on my shoes and started jogging toward the lake, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios about what could have happened to my pregnant wife. As I got closer, I could see Isabel sitting on a bench with a police officer standing nearby and a woman with a phone who seemed to be filming everything. My first impulse was to run over there immediately and demand to know what was happening, but something made me stop and assess the situation more carefully. I realized that whatever was going on, I needed to be smart about how I handled it, especially with law enforcement involved. So, instead of charging in emotionally, I pulled out my phone and started recording from a distance while I figured out the best way to approach this. The woman with the phone was the aggressor in this situation. She was gesturing dramatically, talking loudly to her camera, and pointing at Isabel like she was some kind of exhibit in a museum. I could hear fragments of what she was saying. Words like suspicious behavior and doesn't belong here. And it became crystal clear that my wife was being racially profiled by some self-appointed neighborhood vigilante. The rage that built up inside me was almost overwhelming. But I forced myself to stay calm and keep recording because I had a feeling we were going to need evidence of whatever insanity was unfolding. What I didn't know was that we weren't the only ones documenting this encounter. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, an 82-year-old retired teacher who lived in the house closest to the lake, had been watching the entire confrontation unfold from her kitchen window. Mrs. Patterson had lived in Peneridge for over 30 years, and she had been keeping a careful record of Veronica's harassment campaigns against various families in the neighborhood. She had witnessed the systematic intimidation of the Wind family, the hostile confrontations with the Rodriguez family before they moved away, and now she was watching the same pattern play out with us. Mrs. Patterson wasn't just a passive observer, though. She had been quietly building a case against Veronica for months, documenting incidents, saving screenshots of social media posts, and even recording some of the more egregious harassment episodes from her window. She had been waiting for the right moment to bring all this evidence forward. And as she watched Veronica live stream her attack on a pregnant woman, she knew that moment had finally arrived. She started recording on her tablet, making sure to capture both the video and audio of Veronica's racist commentary. Meanwhile, the community's security system was also capturing everything from multiple angles. Pine Ridge Estates had installed a comprehensive camera network 2 years ago after a series of break-ins, and those cameras covered every common area, including the walking path around the lake. What Veronica didn't realize was that her entire harassment campaign was being recorded in high definition by the very security system she probably supported as a community safety measure. Every aggressive gesture, every racist comment, every moment of intimidation was being preserved as evidence. Back at the confrontation, Officer Thompson was starting to look increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. The more Veronica talked, the more obvious it became that her story didn't add up. She kept changing details, making increasingly wild claims about coordinated infiltration and pregnancy fraud, and her live stream commentary was revealing a level of racial bias that was impossible to ignore. Officer Thompson had been a cop for less than 2 years, but he was smart enough to recognize when someone was wasting police resources with false reports based on personal prejudices. Isabel, meanwhile, was demonstrating remarkable composure under pressure. Despite the obvious physical discomfort from her pregnancy and the stress of being confronted by both a hostile civilian and a police officer, she remained calm, cooperative, and observant. She answered Officer Thompson's questions clearly and respectfully, provided the information he requested, and never once lost her temper or became defensive, even when Veronica made increasingly outrageous accusations about her motives and background. What nobody realized, including me, as I watched from a distance, was that Isabel was using her professional training to handle this exact type of situation. She was mentally cataloging every detail of the encounter, noting Veronica's specific statements and behavior patterns, observing Officer Thompson's responses and decision-making process, and building a comprehensive understanding of how this incident was developing. She wasn't just enduring this harassment, she was gathering intelligence about it. The pain in Isabel's abdomen was getting worse, triggered by the stress and adrenaline of the confrontation. But she was careful not to let that physical discomfort compromise her ability to stay focused and alert. She recognized that this encounter was about much more than just a misunderstanding between neighbors, and that Veronica's behavior represented a pattern of systematic harassment that needed to be addressed through proper channels with solid evidence. As Veronica continued her live stream performance, her audience was growing and the comments were becoming more heated. Some viewers were supporting her community protection efforts, but others were starting to question whether her behavior was appropriate or legal. A few people in the comment section were pointing out that filming someone without permission and making racist assumptions could have legal consequences, but Veronica was too caught up in her performance to pay attention to those warnings. The tension in the air was palpable as these three different agendas played out simultaneously. Veronica wanted to create viral content and validate her prejudices. Officer Thompson wanted to resolve what was a neighborhood dispute without anyone getting hurt or filing complaints. And Isabel wanted to protect herself and her unborn child while gathering evidence of harassment that could be used to prevent future incidents. What none of them knew was that this confrontation was about to take a dramatic turn that would expose truths nobody was expecting and change the entire dynamic of the situation in ways that would leave Veronica questioning everything she thought she knew about power, authority, and consequences. I decided I couldn't just stand there recording anymore. My pregnant wife was clearly in distress. There was a police officer involved, and this crazy woman was still live streaming her harassment campaign to hundreds of viewers. I started walking toward the group, making sure to keep my phone recording as I approached. "Excuse me, officer," I called out, trying to keep my voice calm and respectful. "And Quat, that's my wife you're talking to, and I'd like to know what's going on here, Quat." Veronica immediately swung her camera toward me, her eyes lighting up like she had just hit the jackpot. "And Quat, oh, perfect, Quat," she announced to her live stream audience. "And Quat, now we have accomplice number 2 arriving on the scene. Notice how he's trying to interfere with a police investigation." She was practically bouncing with excitement, convinced that my arrival somehow validated her conspiracy theories about coordinated infiltration and suspicious behavior. Her live stream audience was eating it up, with comments flooding in about how this proved her point about organized criminal activity. Officer Thompson looked relieved to have another adult to talk to, hoping that I might be able to help him make sense of this increasingly bizarre situation. "Sir, I'm Officer Thompson with Pine Ridge Police. We received a call about suspicious activity in the area, and I'm just trying to gather some information." His tone was professional, but tired, and I could tell he was starting to realize that he had been called to deal with what was essentially a neighborhood dispute rather than any actual criminal activity. "And what kind of suspicious activity in Quat?" I asked, genuinely confused about what possible crime my pregnant wife could have committed by sitting on a public bench. Veronica jumped in before Officer Thompson could answer, eager to present her case to both me and her online audience. "Your wife was loitering on private property without authorization, refusing to provide identification when requested by community security, and exhibiting behavior consistent with property surveillance for potential criminal activity." The way she rattled off these accusations like she was reading from a legal document would have been funny if it weren't so infuriating. She was trying to sound official and authoritative, using phrases she had probably learned from watching too many police procedural shows. But what got to me was the way she kept pointing her camera at Isabel, who was struggling with pregnancy discomfort and just wanted this nightmare to end. She was taking a walk recommended by her doctor, I explained to Officer Thompson, and she had to sit down because she wasn't feeling well. We just moved into the neighborhood 2 weeks ago. I was trying to stay calm and factual, but inside I was seething at the way this woman was treating my wife like some kind of criminal. Veronica immediately pounced on this information, turning to her camera with a triumphant expression. Notice how their story keeps changing. First, it was just a casual walk. Now it's a doctor-recommended medical activity. Classic evasive behavior. That's when Isabel spoke up, her voice steady despite the obvious discomfort she was experiencing. "Mom, I'd like you to stop filming me without my permission. I'm having pregnancy complications and your behavior is causing me significant stress." Her request was polite but firm, and it was clear she was trying to de-escalate the situation while protecting both herself and our unborn child. But Veronica wasn't interested in de-escalation. She had too much invested in this confrontation, and backing down now would mean admitting to her audience that she had been wrong about everything. "In public spaces, I have every right to document suspicious activity," she declared, citing what sounded like remembered legal advice from internet forums. "If you're having medical issues, then you should have no problem providing identification to prove you belong here." The medical emergency was becoming more serious by the minute. I could see that Isabel's pain was intensifying and she was starting to look pale and shaky. I pulled out my phone to call 911, but Officer Thompson noticed what was happening and radioed for an ambulance himself. "And quat, we're going to need medical assistance at Pine Ridge Lake in quat," he said into his radio. "And quat, pregnant female experiencing complications Pine quat." Veronica's reaction to this development was unbelievable. Instead of showing any concern for a pregnant woman in distress, she turned to her camera and started speculating about whether this was all an elaborate performance. Patriots, we might be witnessing an Academy Award-worthy performance here. Notice how conveniently these medical complications appeared right when she was asked for identification. The comments on her live stream were becoming increasingly divided, with many viewers starting to express concern about her behavior and question whether she was taking things too far. While we waited for the ambulance, Officer Thompson decided that this situation needed to be resolved one way or another. "Mom, quat," he said to Isabel, and quat, "I'm going to need to see some identification just so we can clear this up and get you the medical attention you need," point and quat. Isabel nodded and reached for her purse. But Veronica immediately stepped forward. "And quat, I'll examine the identification myself, quat," she announced. "And quat, since I'm the one who reported this incident, and I have community authority to verify resident status, this was the moment everything changed, pi and quat." Officer Thompson looked at Veronica like she had completely lost her mind. "Mom, you don't have any authority to examine anyone's identification. You're a civilian who called in a complaint, nothing more." But Veronica was already reaching for Isabel's wallet, live streaming the entire interaction, and providing running commentary for her audience about how she was about to expose the truth about these infiltrators. The physical struggle over the wallet lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Veronica grabbed at Isabel's purse while she was trying to retrieve her ID, causing Isabel to cry out in pain and nearly fall off the bench. Officer Thompson immediately stepped in to separate them, but the damage was done. The stress and physical aggression had triggered something serious, and I could see that Isabel was having trouble breathing. As Veronica finally got her hands on the wallet and opened it in front of her camera, triumphantly declaring that she was about to reveal the truth, her expression suddenly changed. The confident smile disappeared from her face, replaced by confusion and then growing alarm. She had expected to find fake identification or something that would validate her conspiracy theories. But what she found instead was something that made her realize she had made a terrible, potentially criminal mistake. The ambulance sirens were getting louder in the distance, but all I could focus on was my wife's face as she struggled with pain that was clearly beyond normal pregnancy discomfort, and the look of dawning horror on Veronica's face as she stared at whatever she had found in that wallet. The moment Veronica opened Isabel's wallet in front of her live stream camera, her entire world collapsed. There, visible to both her and her 800 online viewers, was a gold detective's badge from the Metro Police Department. The confident smirk that had been permanently plastered on her face for the past hour vanished instantly, replaced by a look of pure terror as the reality of what she had just done hit her like a freight train. "And quat, oh known quat," Veronica whispered, her voice barely audible as she stared at the badge. Her hands started shaking so badly that she nearly dropped the wallet. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, she seemed to realize that she might have made a catastrophic mistake. The comments on her live stream exploded with a mixture of shock, outrage, and secondhand embarrassment as viewers realized they had just watched someone assault a police officer on live video. Officer Thompson's reaction was immediate and professional. "And quat, Mom, please step back and put the wallet down and quat," he said firmly, his entire demeanor shifting as he recognized the badge and understood the gravity of the situation. He had gone from treating this as a simple neighborhood dispute to dealing with a civilian who had just committed assault and harassment against a fellow law enforcement officer. The implications were staggering, and I could see him mentally calculating all the paperwork and legal complications this was about to create. But Veronica, in a display of denial that was both pathetic and infuriating, refused to accept what was right in front of her eyes. "This has to be fake," she announced to her camera, her voice getting higher and more desperate. "Real police officers don't just sit around public areas without identifying themselves. And if Tirius is her too. Anders Oliver Ander and Ander and Ander Ander and Ander and Ander, and female cops don't get pregnant and vulnerable like this." She was grasping at straws, trying to salvage her narrative and convince both herself and her audience that she hadn't just live-streamed herself committing multiple felonies. That's when Isabel finally spoke up from the bench, her voice steady despite the obvious pain she was experiencing. "Veronica Blackwood, you are being recorded assaulting a police officer, filing false reports, and engaging in racial harassment. I am Detective Sergeant Isabel Chen with Metro PD, currently on medical leave due to high-risk pregnancy complications." Her words were clear, professional, and devastating to Veronica's already crumbling world. The revelation that Isabel was not only a police officer, but also knew Veronica's full name sent another wave of panic through our neighborhood vigilante. "And what, how do you know my name?" What Veronica demanded, her live stream forgotten as she tried to process this new information. "And what, are you stalking me? Is this some kind of setup?" What, her paranoia was reaching new heights as she realized that this encounter might not have been as random as she had assumed. Isabel's response was like a carefully placed explosive charge in an already unstable situation. "I know your name because you've been under investigation for systematic harassment and intimidation of minority families in this neighborhood. The Nuan family, the Rodriguez family, the Kim family, they all filed complaints about your behavior over the past 2 years." She paused to catch her breath, the pregnancy complications affecting her ability to speak for long periods, but her message was crystal clear. The live stream comments had completely turned against Veronica at this point. People were frantically posting warnings about legal consequences, telling her to stop filming immediately and expressing outrage about her treatment of a pregnant police officer. Some viewers were even posting screenshots and threatening to report the stream to local authorities. The very audience that had been cheering her on just minutes earlier was now witnessing her complete humiliation and potential criminal liability. Officer Thompson was furiously radioing for backup, realizing that this situation was far beyond anything he was equipped to handle as a rookie cop. "I need supervisory units at Penirridge Lake immediately," he said into his radio, "and possibly detectives from internal affairs. We have a civilian who has assaulted an off-duty officer, and we need senior personnel to handle this properly." The fact that he was calling for internal affairs showed just how serious the legal implications had become. But the biggest shock was still to come. As Isabel continued to explain the investigation, she revealed that she hadn't just happened to be walking in this neighborhood by coincidence. "And quad, I've been living here for 2 weeks as part of an undercover operation to document your harassment patterns and quad," she told Veronica, whose face was now completely white with shock. "And quad, we needed someone to move into the neighborhood and establish residency so we could gather evidence of your systematic targeting of minority families, plan quad." This revelation hit Veronica like a physical blow. Not only had she assaulted a police officer, but she had walked directly into a carefully planned law enforcement operation designed specifically to catch her in the act. Everything she had done today, every racist comment, every illegal demand for identification, every moment of harassment had been exactly what the police needed to build a comprehensive case against her. The irony was delicious. Veronica had been so convinced that she was exposing infiltrators and protecting her community that she had completely missed the fact that she was the one being investigated. Her live stream had provided law enforcement with perfect evidence of her crimes, documented in her own words and broadcast to hundreds of witnesses. As the ambulance sirens got closer and more police cars began arriving on the scene, Veronica made one last desperate attempt to salvage her narrative. "And quat, this is all a setup, quat," she screamed into her camera. "Deep state police conspiracy to silence patriots who are trying to protect their communities." But even her most devoted followers weren't buying it anymore. The evidence was too clear, the situation too obvious, and her behavior too extreme for anyone to defend. And quat, Officer Martinez, who had just arrived as backup, took one look at the scene and immediately recognized Isabel, pointing and quat, "Sergeant Chen, what's your status?" And quat, he asked with obvious concern, completely ignoring Veronica's continued protests about conspiracy theories and fake badges. The respect and familiarity in his voice made it absolutely clear that Isabel was exactly who she claimed to be, and that Veronica had just made the worst mistake of her life. The ambulance ride to Penirridge General Hospital was a blur of sirens, medical equipment, and my growing panic about Isabel's condition. The paramedics were asking rapid-fire questions about her pregnancy timeline, previous complications, and current symptoms while trying to stabilize her vital signs. I held her hand the entire time, watching the monitors and praying that both she and our baby would be okay. Officer Martinez followed us to the hospital in his patrol car with Veronica secured in the back seat, still live streaming and insisting to anyone who would listen that this was all an elaborate government conspiracy. At the hospital, Dr. Sarah Williams, Isabel's obstetrician, met us at the emergency entrance with a team of nurses and immediately began her examination. "And quat, Mrs. Chen, I need to check on both you and the baby and quat," she said, her voice calm but urgent as they transferred Isabel to a hospital bed. "And quat, can you tell me exactly what happened and when these complications started?" Quat, I started to explain about the confrontation with Veronica, but Williams held up her hand and turned to me with a concerned expression that made my stomach drop. "And quat, Mr. Chen, I need to speak with you privately for a moment, quat," she said, leading me to a small consultation room just outside Isabel's treatment area. And quat, the serious tone in her voice made me brace for the worst possible news about my wife and unborn child. "There's something about your wife's pregnancy that you need to know, and I'm required to share this information with you as her emergency contact punning quat." My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear her words over the blood rushing in my ears. "Your wife is not 6 months pregnant as you believed," Dr. Williams said gently, watching my face carefully for my reaction. "According to her medical records and today's examination, she's 36 weeks along, which puts her in the final month of pregnancy. She's been hiding the true timeline from you for the past 3 months." The words hit me like a physical blow, and I had to sit down as the implications of what she was telling me began to sink in. The room seemed to spin as I tried to process this information. My wife, the person I trusted more than anyone in the world, had been lying to me about something as fundamental as when our child was due to be born. Why would she hide this from me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Williams explained that Isabel had been concerned about the stress I was already under with the new job, the move to Pine and the financial pressures of starting a family. So, she had asked the medical staff to keep the real timeline confidential. "The stress from today's incident has triggered early labor," Dr. Williams continued, her words making me feel like the ground was disappearing beneath my feet. "Your wife is having contractions every 4 minutes, and her water could break at any moment. We're doing everything we can to slow down the labor process, but you need to be prepared for the possibility that your daughter might be born tonight." The fact that our baby could arrive within hours, combined with the revelation about the pregnancy deception, was almost too much for my mind to handle. As I sat there trying to absorb this life-changing information, Officer Martinez appeared in the doorway with an update about the legal situation. "Mr. Chen, I thought you should know that we've arrested Miss Blackwood on multiple charges, including assault on a police officer, filing false reports, harassment, and intimidation," quat, he said, his professional demeanor softening slightly as he saw my obvious distress. "And quat, but there's something else you need to know about your wife's investigation that might help explain why today's incident was so important." Pine and quat. Martinez explained that Isabel hadn't just been conducting a random investigation into neighborhood harassment. She had been specifically assigned to the Pine Ridge case because of her connection to the area, something that even I hadn't known about. "Your wife lived in this neighborhood when she was a child," he told me, adding another layer of deception to an already overwhelming situation. "Her family was one of the first Asian families to move here 30 years ago, and they experienced similar harassment that eventually forced them to relocate when she was in middle school." This revelation explained so much about Isabel's determination to take this assignment and her emotional investment in stopping Veronica's pattern of harassment. She wasn't just doing her job as a police officer. She was settling an old score and preventing other families from experiencing the trauma that had forced her own family to abandon their home decades earlier. The personal stakes of this investigation were much higher than I had ever realized, and it added another dimension to the deception she had been maintaining. But the biggest shock was still coming. As Martinez continued explaining the details of the investigation, Dr. Williams returned with an urgent update about Isabel's condition. "And quat, Mr. Chen, your wife's water just broke quat," she announced, the calm professionalism in her voice doing nothing to hide the gravity of the situation. "And quat, we need to prepare for immediate delivery, boy, and quat, the stress from today's assault has triggered full labor, and there's no stopping it now, and quat." The timing was almost surreal. At the exact moment when Veronica's criminal behavior was being officially documented and charges were being filed, the consequences of her actions were manifesting in the most dramatic way possible. The assault she had committed against my pregnant wife had directly caused the premature onset of labor, adding yet another serious charge to her growing list of criminal violations. The irony was that Veronica's live stream had captured evidence not just of harassment and assault, but of actions that had endangered both a police officer and an unborn child. As medical staff rushed around preparing for an emergency delivery, Martinez shared one final piece of information that tied everything together in the most incredible way. "Your wife's investigation into Veronica Blackwood wasn't just about neighborhood harassment," he said, speaking quickly as nurses wheeled equipment into Isabel's room. 2 years ago, Veronica was involved in a domestic violence incident where she harassed and intimidated a woman who was trying to leave an abusive relationship. That woman was too scared to press charges at the time. But your wife has been building a comprehensive case that includes both the domestic violence, intimidation, and the systematic neighborhood harassment. The scope of Veronica's criminal behavior was far more extensive than anyone had realized. She wasn't just a neighborhood busybody who had gotten carried away with social media attention. She was a serial harasser who had been terrorizing vulnerable people for years. Isabel's investigation had uncovered a pattern of targeting women, minorities, and anyone she perceived as weak or different, using intimidation tactics that had escalated over time. As I heard Isabel calling my name from the delivery room, I realized that this day had changed everything about our lives in ways I couldn't have imagined. Our daughter was about to be born under the most extraordinary circumstances, the result of a confrontation that had exposed years of criminal behavior and brought justice to multiple victims of harassment and intimidation. The sound of Veronica's voice could still be heard, echoing from the police car in the parking lot, where she was still live streaming her arrest and claiming that everything was part of a vast conspiracy. But her audience had long since abandoned her, and her words were falling on deaf ears as the legal system began the process of holding her accountable for years of criminal behavior that had finally caught up with her. 3 hours later, I was holding my daughter, Sophia Chen, in my arms while watching Veronica's legal nightmare unfold on the hospital room television. The local news had picked up the story, and the footage from her live stream was being broadcast across every channel in the city. Local woman arrested after assaulting pregnant police officer on Facebook Live read the headline. And the irony of Veronica providing the evidence for her prosecution was not lost on anyone covering the story. Sophia was perfect, weighing 6 lb and 2 oz, despite being born 3 weeks early due to the stress Veronica had caused. As I looked at my daughter's tiny face, I felt an overwhelming mixture of love, relief, and anger at the woman who had nearly caused us to lose this precious moment. Isabel was exhausted but healthy, and she kept apologizing for hiding the real pregnancy timeline from me. And Quat, I just wanted to protect you from worrying, Quat. She whispered, tears in her eyes as she held our daughter. I never imagined it would come out like this. The legal proceedings against Veronica moved with surprising speed. District Attorney Rebecca Morrison had taken personal interest in the case after watching the live stream footage, recognizing it as a clear-cut example of hate crime, prosecution with unprecedented video evidence. We have never had a case where the perpetrator documented their criminal behavior so thoroughly, she told reporters during a press conference. Ms. Blackwood essentially prosecuted herself by live streaming assault, harassment, filing false police reports, and racial intimidation. The courtroom scene 2 weeks later was something I'll never forget. Veronica had decided to represent herself. Convinced that her constitutional knowledge from internet research made her qualified to mount a legal defense, she stood before Judge Margaret Torres, wearing her navy blazer and carrying the same clipboard she had used during our confrontation, apparently believing that looking official would somehow help her case. Her opening statement was a rambling 20-minute monologue about HOA constitutional authority and citizen patrol rights that had the gallery trying not to laugh out loud. And quote, "Your Honor, quote," Veronica declared with complete confidence. And quote, "I was exercising my First Amendment right to protect community safety and my Second Amendment right to bear arms. Bear witness to suspicious activity," and quote. Judge Torres had to call for order when several people in the courtroom couldn't contain their amusement at this legal interpretation. Veronica's confusion about constitutional amendments was just the beginning of what would become a legendary court transcript. The prosecution's case was devastatingly simple. They played Veronica's live stream footage in its entirety, letting her own words and actions speak for themselves. The video showed her making racist comments, physically assaulting a pregnant woman, filing false police reports, and claiming authority she didn't possess. Assistant District Attorney James Park didn't even need to call witnesses. Veronica had provided all the evidence they needed by documenting her crimes in real time. But the most powerful moment came when 12 families from Penirage took the stand to testify about Veronica's systematic harassment campaigns. The Nuon family had driven back from their new home in Sacramento to describe how Veronica's intimidation had forced them to abandon the house they loved. Maria Rodriguez testified about finding threatening notes in her mailbox and having her children followed to school. Mrs. Kim broke down crying as she described how Veronica had called Child Protective Services on her family with false reports of neglect and abuse. The pattern was clear and undeniable. Veronica had been targeting minority families for years, using legal harassment, intimidation, and false official reports to make their lives miserable until they gave up and moved away. What made it even worse was that she had been documenting her victories on social media, treating the forced displacement of innocent families like some kind of game or community service project. The testimony of Mrs. Eleanor Patterson was particularly damning. The 82-year-old retired teacher had been keeping meticulous records of Veronica's behavior for over a year, including screenshots of social media posts, audio recordings of threatening phone calls, and video footage of harassment incidents. "I've been teaching for 45 years, she told the court. and I know a bully when I see one. This woman has been terrorizing decent families for her entertainment. When it came time for Veronica's defense, she stood up with her clipboard and announced that she was calling herself as her first and only witness. Her testimony was a masterpiece of self-incrimination, as she proudly described her community protection activities without seeming to realize that she was confessing to multiple felonies. I have always acted within my authority as an HOA representative quat, she declared, apparently unaware that she had been removed from any official position 8 months earlier. Judge Torres's sentencing was swift and comprehensive. Veronica received 18 months in county jail, 5 years probation, mandatory anger management and cultural sensitivity training, restitution payments to the families she had harassed, and a permanent restraining order preventing her from contacting any Pineridge residents. But the most creative part of the sentence was Judge Torres's decision to make Veronica's live stream footage part of the official police training curriculum. Miss Blackwood. Judge Torres said with barely concealed satisfaction, and quote, "Your video will now be used to train law enforcement officers throughout the state on how to recognize and respond to hate crimes and illegal harassment. Your behavior will serve as an educational tool for years to come, though probably not in the way you intended." End quote. The gallery erupted in applause, and Veronica's face turned bright red as she realized her racist performance would live on forever as an example of exactly what not to do. 6 months later, Pineridge had transformed into everything it should have been from the beginning. The community elected Isabel and me to the HOA board, making us the first Asian American representatives in the neighborhood's history. Our first official act was implementing a strict anti-harassment policy with real consequences for discriminatory behavior. We also created a neighborhood app where residents could report incidents and support each other, turning Veronica's divide-and-conquer tactics into a tool for community building. Veronica moved away immediately after her release. Banned from all Pine Ridge properties and required to complete her probation in another county, the house she had been renting was purchased by the Martinez family, a young Latino couple with twin toddlers who brought joy and laughter to a property that had been associated with nothing but negativity and hate. As for our family, baby Sophia became the unofficial mascot of Pineridge, with neighbors stopping by regularly to check on her and bring gifts. Isabel returned to work as a community liaison officer specializing in hate crime prevention and neighborhood mediation. And I started a cybersecurity consulting firm that helps communities implement digital safety measures and combat online harassment. This story shows us that standing up to bullies and discrimination isn't just about one moment of courage. It's about building communities where everyone belongs and feels safe. Whether you faced a neighborhood Karen, workplace harassment, or any form of intimidation, remember that documentation, staying calm, and knowing your rights can turn the tables completely. Your story matters, and sharing it helps others find strength. If this resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe to Happer Stories for more tales of justice served. What's your craziest neighbor experience? Thanks for sticking around. If it is true life one letter at a time, we are right here with you. Have a story turn property lies into better lives and drama into destiny. Subscribe before they fire us for digital landscaping violation.